The anniversary dinner at Le Bernardin was meant to be a celebration of 10 years, but the diamond tennis bracelet on Elena's wrist wasn't a gift from her husband. It caught the candlelight just as her phone buzzed on the white tablecloth, a message she smiled at while ignoring the man sitting across from her. There is a specific kind of silence that screams louder than an argument, the sound of a marriage ending before the check is even paid. If you want to witness the quiet devastation of betrayal and the slow, satisfying burn of redemption, stay with me, because the hardest part isn't the leaving, it's the coming back. The air inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art was always conditioned to a precise, museum-grade chill. But tonight, amidst the clinking of crystal flutes and the hum of Manhattan's elite, Ethan Caldwell felt the cold settling deep in his marrow. He stood near a towering Egyptian pillar, swirling the scotch in his glass, watching his wife. Elena was 20 feet away, a vision in emerald silk that clung to her silhouette like a second skin. She was laughing, a practiced, melodic sound that threw her head back just enough to expose the long, elegant line of her throat. She was the center of gravity for a cluster of investors and media moguls, radiating a luminosity that usually left Ethan in the shadows. He didn't mind the shadows. As a landscape architect, he preferred the quiet dignity of stone and soil to the frenetic energy of these galas. But tonight was different. Tonight, the shadows felt like a cage. She's in her element, isn't she? Ethan turned to see Marcus, an old college friend and now a corporate attorney standing beside him. Marcus's eyes were fixed on Elena, his expression guarded. "She is," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his chest. "It's a big night for her firm." "Ethan," Marcus started, dropping his voice. He swirled his drink, looking uncomfortable. "I saw her earlier, near the cloakroom, with Julian Thorne." The name landed like a physical blow. Julian Thorne, the real estate titan who was currently funding the Hudson Yards expansion, a project Elena was publicizing and Ethan had bid on just last week. Julian was charming, predatory, and possessed a net worth that made moral boundaries seem like suggestions. "They're discussing strategy," Ethan said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "Julian is a demanding client." "Right," Marcus said, not believing a word of it. He patted Ethan's shoulder, a gesture too heavy with pity. "Just keep your eyes open, buddy." Ethan watched Marcus walk away, then look back at his wife. She was no longer laughing. She was looking at her phone, her thumb tracing the screen with a tenderness she hadn't shown Ethan in months. She typed a quick reply, a small, private smile playing on her lips, before sliding the phone into her clutch. Suddenly, the noise of the party, the string quartet, the chatter, the laughter became unbearable. Ethan needed air. He set his unfinished drink on a passing waiter's tray and began to weave through the crowd, intending to find Elena, to tell her he had a headache, to ask if they could go home. He spotted the emerald dress slipping through the French doors that led to the terrace overlooking Central Park. It was barely 20 degrees outside. Nobody was out there. Ethan followed. He pushed the heavy glass door open just an inch, stopping when the icy wind hit his face. He wasn't alone. In the shadows of the stone balustrade, two figures stood close enough to share breath. Elena was pressed against the stone railing, clutching her shawl. Standing over her, shielding her from the wind with his body, was Julian Thorne. He wasn't discussing business. His hand was resting familiarly on her waist, his fingers slipping beneath the silk of her dress to touch the bare skin of her lower back. Ethan froze. His breath hitched, creating a small cloud of fog in the cold air. "He's boring, Julian." Elena's voice drifted through the crack in the door, clear and sharp. "He's safe, that's why I married him. But safety is, exhausting." Julian chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "And what am I?" "You," Elena whispered, turning her face to kiss Julian's jawline, "are the danger I deserve." Ethan stood paralyzed. The betrayal wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, suffocating realization. It wasn't just that she was cheating. It was the way she spoke of him, like he was an old piece of furniture she was tired of dusting. He watched as Julian pulled her closer, their silhouettes merging into one dark shape against the city lights. Ethan's hand tightened on the brass door handle until his knuckles turned white. He could burst out there. He could scream. He could throw a punch. But as he watched his wife melt into another man's arms, He realized something terrifying. She wouldn't care. He slowly let go of the handle, the door clicking silently back into place. He turned around and walked back into the warmth of the gala. The image of them burned into his retinas, the sound of her dismissing his entire existence echoing in his ears. He didn't go home. He went to the bar. The ride home was a study in suffocation. They sat in the back of the town car, separated by 6 inches of leather seat that felt like an ocean. Elena was scrolling through her primary phone, the blue light illuminating a small, satisfied smile that hadn't left her face since the balcony. She hummed a melody under her breath, something classical, something light. She thought he was drunk. She thought his silence was merely the fatigue of a man who didn't understand her world. When they entered their Tribeca penthouse, the silence of the apartment felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. "I'm going to wash this city off me," Elena announced, kicking off her heels near the foyer console. She didn't look at him. She didn't ask why he had left the party early or why he hadn't spoken a word in 40 minutes. She simply drifted toward the master bath, the emerald silk rustling like dry leaves. Ethan stood in the center of the living room listening to the water turn on. The shower spray hit the marble tiles, a steady, rhythmic drumming. He moved. He didn't go to the liquor cabinet. He walked straight to the bedroom, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet, his eyes fixed on her vanity table. For months, he had noticed how she would inadvertently guard the bottom drawer, standing in front of it when she dressed, closing it a little too quickly if he entered the room. He had dismissed it as paranoia. Now he knew it was instinct. He pulled the drawer open. It was filled with silk scarves and velvet jewelry pouches. He dug his hand underneath the layers of fabric, his fingers brushing against the cold, hard casing of technology. He pulled it out. An iPhone, older model, sleek and black. A burner. His hands weren't shaking. That surprised him. He felt a cold, clinical detachment, like a surgeon preparing to make an incision. He pressed the home button. No passcode. Of course. She was arrogant. She believed he was too honorable, too weak to ever snoop. The screen flared to life, blinding in the dim room. One message thread was open. The contact name was simply J. Ethan scrolled up, his eyes devouring the words that dismantled his life line by line. "The gala is suffocating. I need you," Elena had sent at 8:15 p.m. "Meet me on the terrace. Leave the architect inside," Julian had replied. Ethan felt bile rise in his throat, but he forced himself to keep reading. He needed the wound to be deep enough that it couldn't be stitched back together. He scrolled back weeks, months. "He's planning a weekend in the Hamptons for our anniversary," Elena wrote 3 weeks ago. "God, he's so predictable. It's pathetic, really. He looks at me with those puppy dog eyes, and I just want to scream." "Leave him," Julian wrote. "I will. Once the portfolio's secured, he's useful for the domestic image, for now. Plus, I'd miss the penthouse. But he's so small, Julian. Next to you, he's invisible." Invisible. Ethan lowered the phone. The word hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. It wasn't just the sex. The photos he scrolled past, explicit, intimate, taken in hotels Ethan had paid for, were painful, yes, but the text messages were the real execution. She didn't just desire another man. She despised the man she had married. She viewed his kindness as weakness, his loyalty as stupidity. The shower water stopped. Ethan shoved the phone back under the scarves, sliding the drawer shut just as the bathroom door handle turned. He stepped back, moving into the shadows near the window, turning his back to the room. Elena emerged, wrapped in a white robe, towel drying her hair. The room smelled of her expensive jasmine, soap, the scent he used to associate with home. Now it smelled like a lie. "You're still up?" she asked, her voice indifferent. She sat at the vanity right above the drawer where the evidence of her treachery lay and began applying night cream. "You really should sleep, Ethan. You look terrible." Ethan watched her reflection in the glass, the calm, beautiful face of a woman who could destroy a man and then tell him to get some rest. "I'm just thinking," Ethan said. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, rough, hollow. "Don't think too hard," she said lightly, wiping a smudge from her cheek. "It doesn't suit you." Ethan stared at her back. The rage that had been simmering was cooling into something harder, something brittle and sharp. He wasn't going to scream. Not tonight. Tonight, he was going to watch the performance one last time. No, Ethan whispered to the glass, though she wasn't listening. It doesn't. Ethan didn't leave the room. He didn't retreat to the shadows. He walked back to the vanity, his movements stiff, like a man wading through deep water. He reached into the drawer, ignoring Elena's sudden sharp intake of breath, and retrieved the black phone. He placed it gently on the marble countertop, right next to her jar of La Mer cream. The reflection in the mirror changed instantly. Elena's hand froze mid-motion. The boredom vanished from her eyes, replaced not by fear, but by a cold, calculating annoyance. She didn't turn around. She stared at the phone in the glass, then lifted her gaze to meet his. So, she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its musical lilt. You've been digging. I saw you on the balcony, Ethan said. His voice broke, a jagged crack in the quiet room. I saw you with Julian. I read the messages, Elena. Invisible? Is that what I am? Elena sighed a long, exasperated sound, as if he had just asked her to take out the trash. She capped the jar of cream with slow, deliberate movements. I told Julian you wouldn't understand, she muttered, finally swiveling on the stool to face him. She pulled her robe tighter, crossing her legs. She looked like a queen holding court, not a wife caught in adultery. This is exactly what I meant. You have no stomach for the way the world actually works. The way the world works? Ethan stared at her, incredulous. We've been married for 10 years. I built this life with you. I supported you when you were an intern fetching coffee. And you call me small to a man who treats people like assets? He treats people like adults, Ethan, Elena snapped. He takes what he wants. He has ambition. Fire you? She looked him up and down, her expression curling into a sneer. You're content drawing pretty little gardens. You're safe. You're boring. You're nice. She said the word nice like it was a slur. I loved you, Ethan whispered. The sheer inadequacy of the past tense hit him hard. The grief wasn't a wave. It was a wall, crushing him against the reality of her indifference. I thought we were partners. We were, she said, shrugging. Until I outgrew you. I didn't want to hurt you, Ethan. I just wanted more, someone who matches my altitude. Julian gets me. He sees the power in me. You only see the wife you want to protect. Ethan felt a tear, hot and humiliating, spill over his eyelid. He tried to wipe it away quickly, but his hand shook. He felt exposed, stripped raw in front of the person who was supposed to guard his back. The pain was physical, a twisting knife in his gut. How can you sit there and say that? His voice trembled. Doesn't this mean anything to you? Do I mean nothing? Elena watched him. She watched his chest heave, watched the single tear track through the stubble on his cheek, watched his hands tremble by his sides. And then she laughed. It wasn't a nervous chuckle, it was a genuine, open laugh, bright and cruel. She shook her head, looking at the ceiling as if sharing a private joke with the universe. Oh my God, she choked out, still giggling. Look at you. You're actually crying, like a child. She stood up, brushing past him as if he were a piece of furniture placed inconveniently in the hallway. She stopped at the door, looking back at him with eyes that held zero empathy, only amusement. This is why I cheated, Ethan, she said, her voice dry now, the laughter fading into a smirk. Because I need a man, not a martyr. Sleep in the guest room. We'll discuss the divorce terms when you're done feeling sorry for yourself. She walked out, flipping off the master bedroom light, leaving him standing in the dark, the echo of her laughter ringing in his ears louder than any scream. Ethan didn't go to the guest room. He stood in the dark of the master bedroom for a long time, listening to the rhythm of the apartment settling. He heard the distant hum of the sub-zero refrigerator, the settle of the floorboards, and the soft, steady breathing of the woman who had just laughed at his devastation. Something inside him had snapped. It wasn't a loud break, it was the quiet sound of a tether being cut. The grief that had paralyzed him 10 minutes ago evaporated, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like ice water in his veins. She wanted him to be strong, so I assume. She wanted him to stop being nice? Fine. He moved through the apartment like a phantom. He didn't turn on the lights. The ambient glow of the Manhattan skyline filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows was enough. He went to the study, his sanctuary, and opened his laptop. Ethan wasn't just a gardener, he was a businessman. He logged into their joint accounts. For years, he had let Elena manage the lifestyle spending while he handled the investments. He watched the numbers on the screen, the millions that represented 10 years of his work in her image. With steady fingers, he executed a series of transfers. He didn't empty the accounts, he wasn't a thief, but he moved exactly 50% of their liquid assets into a private holding account he had opened years ago for a project that never launched. He left her the penthouse. He left her the stocks tied to her firm. He took only what was his liquidity and his freedom. He closed the laptop and slid it into his leather messenger bag. Next came his sketchbooks. He didn't pack clothes, toiletries, or the Patek Philippe watch she had given him for his 30th birthday. He left the watch on the desk. It was too heavy anyway. He walked to the kitchen. The marble island gleamed under the pendant lights. This was where they used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings, where he had foolishly believed they were building a future. Ethan looked at his left hand. The platinum band felt foreign now, a shackle disguised as jewelry. He slid it off. The skin underneath was pale, a white stripe of flesh that hadn't seen the sun in a decade. He placed the ring in the center of the island. He reached for a notepad, the pen hovering over the paper. He thought about writing a defense. I loved you. Or perhaps an accusation. You are cruel. Or even a warning. He will break you. But he realized that any word he left behind would be a gift to her. It would be proof that he still cared enough to communicate. Elena thrived on attention, even negative attention. Silence was the one language she couldn't manipulate. He capped the pen and put it down. No note. He picked up his bag and walked to the front door. He didn't look back at the hallway leading to the bedroom. He didn't check to see if she was stirring. The woman sleeping in that bed was a stranger. Ethan opened the heavy steel door. The corridor outside was silent. He stepped out, the latch clicking shut with a sound that felt like a gunshot in the quiet building. He took the elevator down 40 floors. When he stepped out into the lobby, the night doorman, sleepy and startled, jumped to his feet. Mr. Caldwell, everything all right? You're leaving? Now? It's 3:00 a.m. Yes, Henry, Ethan said, and for the first time that night, his voice was completely steady. He didn't look like a man who had been broken. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a long coma. I'm heading out early. He pushed through the revolving doors into the biting cold of the New York night. He didn't hail a cab to a hotel. He hailed one to JFK. As the taxi pulled away, Ethan looked out the rear window. The penthouse lights were dark. By the time Elena woke up to find the empty space beside her and the ring on the counter, he would be 30,000 feet in the air, crossing the continent, erasing himself from her skyline. The rain in Washington state was different from the rain in New York. In Manhattan, rain was an inconvenience, dirty water splashing against taxi tires, gray slush piling up on the curbs. Here, 3,000 miles away, and 3 years later, the rain was a living thing. It was a constant, rhythmic drumming against the canopy of the temperate rainforest, a sound that washed things clean rather than making them dirty. Ethan stood on the cantilever deck of the structure that had consumed his life for the last 36 months. He looked different. The clean-shaven, soft-jawed man in the tuxedo was gone. In his place was a man with a trimmed beard threaded with premature gray, wearing flannel and work boots caked in mud. His hands, once smooth from handling nothing heavier than a drafting pen, were now calloused from working the timber himself. He took a sip of black coffee, staring out at the mist rolling off the Puget Sound. Behind him, the sliding glass doors of the Solace Center stood open. The building was his masterpiece, a retreat for trauma recovery that didn't look like a clinic, but like a part of the forest itself. He had designed it using raw concrete, reclaimed cedar, and vast sheets of glass that dissolved the barrier between the safety of the indoors and the wildness of the outside. It was a physical manifestation of his own healing, finding strength in the broken places. Ethan? He didn't jump. He turned slowly. Maya, his studio manager, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 20s who knew nothing of his past life other than he paid well and rarely spoke, was standing in the doorway holding a tablet. "The committee called," she said, her voice unusually high. She was trying to suppress a grin. Ethan turned back to the mist. "And? They're not asking for revisions, Ethan. They're giving you the Prism Award, the Solace Project." It won, unanimously. Ethan watched a hawk circle the gray sky. The Prism Award. It was the architectural equivalent of an Oscar. It meant magazine covers. It meant global recognition. It meant his face and his name would be plastered across every design journal and lifestyle website in the world, including the ones on the coffee tables of Upper East Side penthouses. "Turn it down," Ethan said quietly. "I can't turn it down." Maya stepped onto the deck, the rain dampening her hair. "They've already released the press packet. The article is going live in New York in," she checked her watch, "10 minutes. The Architect of Silence, Ethan Caldwell's masterpiece of grief and redemption." That's the headline. Ethan closed his eyes. He felt a phantom ache on his ring finger, a sensation he hadn't felt in a year. He had come here to disappear, to prove, if only to himself, that he wasn't small. He had poured his agony into the foundation of this building. Every beam, every angle was a rebuttal to the laughter that still haunted his nightmares. He had wanted to be great. He just hadn't realized that greatness would require him to be visible again. "They want you in New York," Maya added softly, "for the Hudson Riverfront revitalization. They saw the drone footage of this place and fired their lead firm. They want the guy who built Solace." The Hudson Riverfront. That was Julian Thorne's territory, or it had been. Ethan opened his eyes. The hawk dived, disappearing into the tree line with lethal precision. He wasn't the man who fled in the middle of the night anymore. He had rebuilt himself in the cold and the rain. He had learned that silence wasn't weakness. It was a weapon, if you knew how to wield it. "Book the flight," Ethan said, his voice raspy but firm. Maya blinked. "For the award ceremony?" "No." Ethan turned to face her, and for the first time in 3 years, there was a glint of something dangerous in his eyes. A cold fire. "For the meeting. If New York wants the Architect of Silence, I'll give them exactly what they're asking for." The lunchtime rush at Le Cuckoo was deafening, a cacophony of silverware and networking. But for Elena, it felt strangely distant. 3 years ago, she would have been at the center table, holding court. Today, she was seated near the kitchen door, dining alone, waiting for a man who was 40 minutes late. She checked her phone for the 5th time. No messages from Julian. Her thumb hovered over his contact. She wanted to type, "Where are you?" But her pride, already bruised and battering against the ribs of her chest, wouldn't allow it. The dynamic had shifted months ago. The danger she had craved in Julian had turned into cruelty. He didn't answer her calls. He forgot their dates. He treated her with the same dismissive amusement she had once used on Ethan. A waiter approached, his expression apologetic. "Madam, Mr. Thorne's assistant just called. He won't be able to make it." Something about closing a deal. Elena felt the heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't just the rejection. It was the public nature of it. She nodded, feigning indifference. "Fine. Bring the check." "Mr. Thorne has already taken care of the bill," the waiter added. It was a payoff, a dismissal. "I won't eat with you, but here's $50 for a salad so you don't make a scene." Elena gathered her purse and walked out, head high, ignoring the whispers she imagined followed her. The truth was worse than whispers. Nobody was looking at her at all. Since the divorce, her reputation had taken a hit. Clients preferred stable publicists, not women whose messy personal lives were fodder for gossip columns. And without Ethan's quiet, steady income covering the mortgage, the maintenance fees on the penthouse were bleeding her dry. She was living on credit and fumes. She stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cold wind whipping her hair across her face. She hailed a cab. Ubers were surging, and she had to watch her limits. Inside the taxi, she scrolled through industry news, desperate for a distraction. A headline on the New York Times real estate section caught her eye. It was a render of the new Hudson Riverfront Park, a project Julian had been obsessed with, a project that had been stalled for years due to design disputes. The return of silence. Award-winning architect Ethan Caldwell takes lead on Hudson project. Elena stopped, breathing. She tapped the link, her fingers trembling. The photo wasn't of the building. It was of Ethan, but it wasn't the Ethan she remembered. The man in the photo wore a dark turtleneck and a charcoal coat, standing against a backdrop of gray mist and raw timber. He looked weathered, harder. His eyes, once warm and pleading, stared into the camera with an unnerving intensity. He looked expensive. She read the article. After a 3-year hiatus in the Pacific Northwest, where his Solace project redefined therapeutic architecture, Caldwell returns to Manhattan. When asked about his new vision for the city, Caldwell stated, "New York is a city of noise. I intend to build the quiet." The irony was a physical blow. She had left him because he was too quiet, too invisible. Now the entire city was talking about him. Her phone buzzed. A notification from Instagram. It was a post from a 22-year-old influencer, a swimwear model. The photo showed a diamond bracelet, disturbingly similar to the one Elena had worn years ago, resting on a wrist in the passenger seat of a familiar Ferrari. The caption read, "New toys. Thank you, Jay." Elena dropped the phone into her lap. The cab rattled over a pothole, jarring her bones. She looked out the window at the passing city. She had traded a man who would have died for her for a man who treated women like leased cars. She was 35, alone, and drowning in debt. And the husband she had mocked for being small was coming back to reshape the skyline she lived in. She didn't cry. She was too shocked for tears. She just sat there feeling the terrifying, hollow sensation of a woman who realizes she has thrown away the only thing that was real. The unveiling of the Hudson Riverfront project was held in a glass pavilion that cantilevered over the water, a temporary structure that cost more than most people earned in a decade. The room was filled with the same sharks that had populated the gala 3 years ago: investors, critics, socialites. But the energy was different. They weren't circling each other, they were circling Ethan. Ethan stood near the scale model of his design. He wasn't holding a drink, he wasn't making small talk. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, listening to the city councilman praise his visionary restraint. Ethan's face was unreadable. The beard he had grown in Washington was trimmed close now, framing a jawline that seemed carved from granite. He didn't look like a man who sought approval. He looked like a man who decided what was approved. Across the city, in the penthouse that was currently 3 months behind on maintenance fees, Elena was staring at her reflection. She had spent 2 hours getting ready. She chose a dress that was midnight blue, demure, elegant, reminiscent of the woman she was when they first met, not the woman she had become with Julian. She applied her makeup with surgical precision, concealing the shadows under her eyes and the stress lines that had appeared since the credit card companies started calling. She needed to get into that pavilion. She had called Marcus 3 times. The first 2 went to voicemail. On the third, he answered with a sigh, "Elena, I really don't think this is a good idea." "I'm his wife, Marcus," she had lied, her voice trembling just enough to sound sympathetic. "Technically, the papers were never finalized. I want to congratulate him. I owe him that. Please." She heard the hesitation on the line. Marcus was a lawyer. He knew the legal reality, but he also remembered the man Ethan used to be, the man who would never turn someone away. "Fine," Marcus had said, his voice cold. "I'll leave your name at the door. But don't make a scene, Elena. He's different now." She arrived at the gala 20 minutes later. The doorman checked her name, his eyes flickering with a moment of recognition. Not respect, just recognition. Before lifting the velvet rope, Elena stepped inside. The air conditioning hit her, bringing back the sensory memory of the night she destroyed her marriage. But this time, she was the one shivering. She scanned the room, ignoring the side eyes from women who knew about the affair, about Julian dumping her, about her fall from grace. She didn't care about them. She needed Ethan. She spotted him near the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was alone for a brief second, staring out at the dark water of the Hudson. The lighting in the pavilion cast a halo around him. He looked powerful. He looked solitary. Elena felt a surge of twisted hope. He's alone, she thought. He did all this for me, to prove he could be the man I wanted. She adjusted her dress, took a glass of champagne to steady her nerves, and began to walk toward him. She rehearsed her opening line. She would be soft. She would be apologetic. She would touch his arm, just lightly, the way she used to when she wanted something. She would remind him of the good years before Julian, before the black box in the vanity. She was 10 feet away when he turned. He didn't see her at first. His eyes swept over the crowd, distant and bored. Then his gaze landed on her. Elena stopped. She expected anger. She expected pain. She expected the look of a wounded dog that she had seen that last night in the bedroom. But Ethan didn't flinch. His pulse didn't jump. He looked at her with the same polite, mild interest he had shown the architectural model. It was a look devoid of history. He didn't walk away. He simply stood there, waiting, as if she were a client he had forgotten he had an appointment with. Elena swallowed the lump in her throat and took the final step, entering his orbit. The smell of the river mixed with his scent, cedar and something clean, sharp. "Hello, Ethan," she whispered. "Elena," Ethan replied. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't lean in for a social kiss. He said her name with the flat, courteous tone one might use for a distant acquaintance met in a grocery store aisle. Elena flinched inwardly, but she forced her smile to remain fixed. She took a step closer, invading his personal space, smelling the crisp scent of success that clung to him. "You look incredible, Ethan," she said, her voice dropping to that intimate register she used to reserve for late nights. "I saw the article. The Architect of Silence. It fits you." "It's just a headline," Ethan said, taking a sip of his sparkling water. He looked over her shoulder, checking the time on a watch that was definitely not the Patek Philippe she had given him. "Why are you here, Elena?" The directness caught her off guard. The old Ethan would have danced around the question, afraid to be rude. "I wanted to see you," she said, letting a tremor enter her voice. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry about how things ended, about Julian." Ethan finally looked at her. His eyes were clear, dark, and utterly devoid of the warmth she remembered. "There's no need to apologize," he said. "Of course there is," she insisted, reaching out to touch his sleeve. He didn't pull away, but his arm went rigid, like stone. "I was foolish, Ethan. I was chasing something shiny because I was scared of settling down. But Julian, he was a monster. He didn't know me. Not like you did." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening, waiting for him to crack, waiting for him to say, "I know," or "I missed you too," or even, "How could you?" "I don't know you, Elena," Ethan said softly. The words hung in the air between them, suspended by the low hum of the jazz band. "What?" she whispered. "I knew a version of you," Ethan continued, his voice calm, terrifyingly reasonable. "But the woman who laughed at me while I was crying in our bedroom? That's who you are. And frankly, I have to thank you for that." Elena blinked, confusion warring with the rising panic in her chest. "Thank me?" "If you hadn't been so cruel that night," Ethan said, "I might have stayed. I might have tried to fix it. I might have spent the rest of my life trying to be enough for you. Your cruelty set me free, Elena. It was the kindest thing you ever did." He set his glass down on a passing tray. "Ethan, please," she stammered, the tears finally spilling over, hot and real. "I'm drowning. My firm is failing. I'm alone. I miss us. Can't we just get coffee? Talk?" Ethan looked at her tears. He watched them track through her perfect makeup with a clinical detachment. He remembered how those tears would have once brought him to his knees, how he would have burned the world down to make her smile. Now he felt nothing, not anger, not vindication, just a mild desire to be somewhere else. "I can't," Ethan said. He gestured toward the other side of the room where a woman with kind eyes and a brilliant smile, the lead landscape designer for the project, was waving at him. "My life is full, Elena. There's no room in it for ghosts." He adjusted his cuffs. "Take care of yourself," he said, and then he turned his back. He walked away, his stride long and confident, moving toward the warmth of his colleagues, toward the woman waiting for him, toward the future he had built with his own two hands. He didn't look back once. Elena stood frozen in the middle of the crowded room. People flowed around her like water around a rock. She turned toward the massive glass wall that overlooked the Hudson. The pavilion was designed to reflect the city lights, turning the glass into a mirror against the darkness of the river. She saw herself in the reflection. The midnight blue dress, the expensive hair, the fading beauty. And she saw the tears streaming down her face, ugly and unchecked. She was crying for the husband she had lost, for the life she had torched, and for the crushing realization that he hadn't left to punish her. He had left because he had outgrown her. 3 years ago, she had laughed while he broke. Now, amidst the applause and the champagne meant for him, she covered her mouth to stifle a sob, watching the man she called invisible disappear into a life where she no longer existed.